caused by a border dispute as the new colonies of North America were divided up among the European powers. Dummer's War of 1722 to 1725 comprised a series of battles between the New England colonies and the Wabanaki Confederacy, who had allied themselves with New France. Starting with several raids against New England fishermen and settlements, the conflict soon escalated as the British colonies expanded along the coast of Maine and into Nova Scotia, ultimately leading to British victory as they sent the natives into retreat. Dummer's War was also known as the Fourth Anglo-Abenaki War, and had been preceded by three previous Indian wars, including King Philip's War in 1675, King William's War in 1688, and Queen Anne's War between 1703 and 1711. This latest conflict being a direct outcome of the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which brought about an end to the preceding Queen Anne's War. As a result of the treaty, the borders of colonial territories in Northeast America were reshaped, but did not consider the existing claims of Indian tribes to land within their boundaries, with French Acadia being ceded to Great Britain as the province of Nova Scotia, though its borders were fiercely disputed. Primarily, the problems arose on land between the Kennebec River in eastern Maine and the Isthmus of Chignecto, which comprises the Canadian province of New Brunswick, this land being occupied by a number of Algonquin-speaking Indian tribes, loosely allied with the Wabanaki Confederacy, who also claimed sovereignty over most of this territory and had occupied portions of the land before the colonists. To try and seek a resolution with the natives, Massachusetts Governor Joseph Dudley organized a peace conference at Portsmouth, New Hampshire, wherein the Wabanaki voiced their objection to the assertion that the French had ceded their territory to Britain in eastern Maine and New Brunswick, though they were willing to agree the boundaries at the Kennebec River and the establishment of government-run trading posts in their territory. This subsequently led to the Treaty of Portsmouth on July 13, 1713, in the presence of 8 representatives of the Wabanaki Confederacy, which asserted British sovereignty over their territory, though while other Abenaki tribal leaders would come to sign the treaty by the end of 1714, the Micmac never provided their support for the document. Therefore, with the treaty signed, New England settlements expanded east of the Kennebec River, and a thriving fishing business was established in Nova Scotia waters, a permanent fishing settlement at Canso being established, which upset the local Micmac, who subsequently began raiding the town and attacking the fishermen. This led to the building of a fort at Canso in 1720 to defend against the tribesmen, with other forts also being established around the mouth of the Kennebec River, including Fort George at Brunswick, Fort Menascue at Aroostook, St. George's Fort at Thomaston, and Fort Richmond at Richmond. By 1717, negotiations between the Wabanakis and the British government in Massachusetts stalled due to an inability to agree the sovereignty of the contested lands, and over the next few years, as New England settlers continued to build homesteads east of the Kennebec River, Wabanaki raids remained a constant threat, with livestock stolen and fishermen attacked. In 1720, Canso was attacked by a joint force of French and Micmac warriors, who were led by French Jesuit priest Sebastien Rale, who lived among the Kennebec tribe at Norridgewock in central Maine, the British demanding that Rale be removed from the native lands due to his encouragement of their raiding parties on New England settlers. The Wabanakis refused in July 1721, demanding instead the release of hostages who had been captured during earlier skirmishes, in exchange for a delivery of furs made in restitution for their raiding, the Massachusetts governor making no official response, and thus led to the Wabanakis sending him a written document illustrating their perception of what would be fair boundaries between the colonists and the tribes. The British, however, ignored this document, claiming it had been stoked by French colonial interests in the region so as to reclaim land ceded in the wake of the Treaty of Utrecht, and thus a military expedition was sent under the command of Colonel Thomas Westbrook of Thomaston to capture Father Rale in January 1722. Arriving at Norridgewock, Father Rale had been forewarned of the British approach and thus had escaped into the forest, though in his haste to depart, he had left behind a strongbox with a secret compartment, inside of which were incriminating documents that proved Rale's involvement as an agent of the new French government in Quebec, and that his mission had been to provide the arms necessary to allow the Indians to rise up and overthrow the British. In response to the raid on Norridgewock, the Abenakis attacked Fort George on June 13th, burning the village and taking 60 hostages, followed by a siege of Fort St. George from July 15th that lasted 12 days, the warriors, after withdrawing from Fort St. George, attacking and burning Brunswick as they returned to Norridgewock. With the tribesmen gathering under Father Rale during July 1722, the British government formally declared war on the Wabanakis from July 25th, with Lieutenant Governor William Dummer conducting the Massachusetts involvement, while New France sent 500 troops to aid Father Rale and the Wabanaki warriors, hence Dummer's War had officially begun. The first action of the war took place on September 10th, against Arrowsick, where the fort was assaulted by Rale and his mixture of native tribesmen and new French soldiers, though despite the village being burned and its cattle slaughtered, the fort held, leaving the Indians to destroy Brunswick and other settlements near the mouth of the Kennebec as an act of defiance. In March 1723, Colonel Thomas Westbrook led 230 men to the Penobscot River, and then upstream 32 miles to the Penobscot village, whereupon they found the vacant settlement and had it burnt to the ground. Throughout the remainder of 1723, Father Rale and the Wabanaki Confederacy of Acadia undertook 14 individual raids against the New England settlements, including attacks on Falmouth, Scarborough, Berwick, York, Arrowsick, Saco in Maine, and Dover in New Hampshire. These raids, however, worked with the intention of causing major disruption through the burning of property and the slaughtering of cattle, as due to the strength of the various fortifications at these locations, any attempts to mount a full frontal assault on the British positions would be costly and futile. In terms of casualties among the settlers, these were generally restricted to attacks on individual homesteads away from the fort towns, with farmers and fishermen killed during the initial fighting, while those who survived the encounter would be taken hostage and ransomed to the British. On Christmas Day 1723, 60 natives besieged Fort St. George, with the commanding officer, Captain Kennedy, maintaining defense for 30 days until a relief column under Colonel Westbrook arrived that put the enemy to flight. Total casualties for the British during the campaign of 1723 being approximately 30 killed against an unknown number of native deaths. Moving into 1724, the Wabanaki Confederacy conducted 10 raids on the Maine frontier during the spring that either killed, wounded, or imprisoned more than 30 New Englanders, while a sloop captured in Kennebunk Harbor saw its entire crew slaughtered. On April 30th, in an attempt to root out the Indians, Captain Josiah Winslow and Sergeant Harvey departed Fort St. George with 17 men aboard 2 whaling boats, but became separated the following day, whereupon both groups were ambushed by up to 300 Abenakis. Sergeant Harvey's boat was overwhelmed first, with himself and all his men being killed, with the exception of 3 native guides who escaped back to the fort, while Winslow fought off wave after wave of canoes for several more hours before they too were overcome and butchered, with only the 3 native guides surviving to give news of the massacre. In May and June 1724, the Indians mounted a highly successful campaign against Dover, New Hampshire, while British shipping came under attack from canoe raids being launched from Cape Sable Island, leading to 22 vessels being captured with the deaths of 22 New Englanders, while dozens more were taken prisoner. On July 4, 1724, a war party of 60 Micmacs and Maliseets raided the capital of Annapolis Royal, where they killed and scalped a sergeant and a private, wounded 4 more soldiers, and terrorized the village, burning houses and taking prisoners, the natives eventually being driven from the area by reinforcements, with one of the captured warriors being executed on the same spot as where the sergeant had been scalped. On August 22nd, the New Englanders, in the face of the various successes made by the tribesmen, launched an aggressive campaign up the Kennebec and Penobscot rivers, leading to a violent assault on Norridgewock that caused a majority of the Abenakis to flee in terror, while those who remained were slaughtered in the ensuing battle, Father Rale being among the dead, who was killed in the opening moments of the fight alongside a leading chief and nearly 24 women and children. Following the destruction of Father Rale and his forces at Norridgewock, the New England attack group moved north, destroying villages and burning Abenaki farms as they continued to put the tribesmen to flight, eventually reaching the Abenaki village of St. Francis and Becancour in the Quebec. Raids continued throughout the winter of 1724 and into early 1725, leading to various Abenaki villages being burned and warriors killed by the elite troop of Captain John Lovewell, their main area of operation being north of Dunstable, New Hampshire, and into the White Mountains. During Lovewell's 3rd expedition on April 16, 1725, his troop of 46 men encountered a Pequawket war party led by Chief Porgus, resulting in an ambush that saw Lovewell and 8 of his men killed in the opening action, although ultimately the survivors were able to retreat to a strong position where they continued to fend off against the natives until sunset, the expedition losing 26 men, while the Indians lost a substantial number of warriors, including Chief Porgus. In Vermont and western Massachusetts, the New Englanders went up against Grey Lock, a western Abenaki warrior chieftain, who had conducted various raids on Northfield and Rutland in Massachusetts during 1723, while throughout 1724, His warriors attacked groups of working men in Hatfield, Deerfield, Northfield, and Westfield. Hence, Dummer ordered fortifications to be established along the Vermont frontier, including the eponymous Fort Dummer, and more soldiers were moved into the region to protect the workers plying their trade in the fields, though Greylock proved to be a highly effective and elusive enemy, and would continue to pick off New England scouting parties into his land well into the summer of 1725. Ultimately, while the native warriors had proven themselves to be cunning and formidable foes throughout Dummer's war, the Penobscot tribal chiefs expressed a willingness to enter peace talks with Lieutenant Governor Dummer in December 1724, despite the fact that the authorities of New France desired their continued harassment of the British in order to destabilize the New England colonies. In the end, Governor Dummer and the chiefs announced an end to hostilities on July 31, 1725, the terms of the negotiation being that the Penobscots would be allowed to retain Jesuit priests, but the two parties were in disagreement concerning land titles and British sovereignty over the Wabanakis. Chief Laron, while disagreeing with the matter of British sovereignty, continued to pursue a peaceful resolution, and thus dispatched wampum belts to other tribal leaders in order to end the conflict, though due to none of the envoys being able to reach Grey Lock, he would continue to undertake raids against the settlements of western Massachusetts until the end of 1727, at which point he disappears from historic record. As a result of the war, the Indian population declined on the Kennebec and Penobscot rivers, and western Maine came more strongly under British control, the terms of Dummer's treaty being restated at every major new treaty conference for the next 30 years, though no further major conflict in the region would occur until King George's War in 1744, during which Great Britain and New France would once again go head-to-head in battle with Native American support for both sides. In New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, Dummer's treaty essentially marked the end of new French footholds in Maine, while the Micmacs and Maliseets continued to declare their refusal at being considered British subjects, peace in Nova Scotia lasting for 18 years, at which point the British took control of New Brunswick at the end of Father Le Loutre's war, with the defeat of Le Loutre at Fort Beausejour. In the end, Dummer's war illustrated a generally successful campaign of raiding warfare against the New England settlers by the Native American tribes, as despite the warriors being generally outmatched technologically against the fortified and heavily armed British, the tribesmen demonstrated a superb ability to strike when needed and deliver significant damage without becoming bogged down in a protracted fight with the colonists that would cost them a majority of their force. With that said, once the British had regrouped following the initial success of the tribes against the settlements and farms across the region, the sheer strength and ability of the New Englanders to more ably protect their assets through enhanced forts and defences led to what was essentially a stalemate, and finally, after nearly 4 years of fighting, the uneasy peace that had existed before was resumed for the time being.